welcome to another Satrix Virtual Roundtable. My name is Christian Muma, Senior Director of Customer Insight, and with me today is
Jonathan Beretta. I'm Vice President of Client Services.
And Jonathan and I each have 7+ years of experience here. And over the years, we've seen many clients come to us with their attempts at drafting a survey questionnaire. And many people go into questionnaire design overconfident, and they may not possess the expertise necessary to design something that's robust and that's going to get you really good data. That's why it's important to bring in experts such as Satrix Solutions who have the industry knowledge and background to design an effective questionnaire that will give you actionable insights. And so if you go to the next slide, we'll start with the first common consideration. And Jonathan, you want to talk to us about demographics?
Yeah, Christian, I mean, this comes up a lot, right? A lot of times, marketing or sales teams within an organization want as much demographical data as possible, but they don't take the time to just look at what they have in their own CRM and things of that nature when they're building it out. They want to ask questions. But if you're surveying your current customers, I'm not talking about prospects or maybe past customers, but current ones, that can really be off-putting for someone to have a couple of questions in the survey, ask them things that your customer feels you should already know about them. And if you're having to ask them, that creates a problem. And it'll turn people off to maybe finishing the survey or even taking the survey if those kind of questions are on the first page where they usually fall. So our tip is really to keep those type of questions out of a survey going to current customers if you really want to make sure that those individuals take that survey seriously and are willing to fill it out. You know, and that kind of ties into the next one here, Christian, that I'll let you take. You know, what are some types of inadequate response options that we've seen, you know, people come to us asking us to help them with?
One example that we get from new clients that we work with is the multiple choice scale or Likert scale. For us, we know that we need an equal distribution of positive and negative choices with a midpoint. A lot of these first drafts that we get directly from our clients will maybe have one negative response followed by 3 or 4 positive responses and no midpoint. And what this does is it actually biases your data to be to skew more positive, whereas it doesn't necessarily capture the true sentiment of the respondents you're surveying. But when you think about your response options, you want to have them clear cut and separate from one another. One example is if you ask a tenure-based question or trying to measure some kind of time, time frame, make sure that those options don't overlap with one another. For example, if you have one of the options as 0 to 6 months and then the next one is 4 months to a year, obviously there's a 2-month overlap, and that could be really confusing for some of the respondents. And then also you consider that there's going to be impact on your survey results, and to make your data a little less actionable and less reliable, to be honest, let's be real. And then there's also, you got to consider what your audience may know. So oftentimes adding a don't know NA option at the end is a really good way to make sure that the feedback you do get is accurate and actionable. And that actually plays in nicely to thinking about the rating level inconsistencies. Jonathan, can you talk to us about that?
Yes, I mean, Christian, you just talked about, you know, situations where it might be a time frame where you're trying to figure out what best works for you to put those in buckets. Satisfaction type questions, for example, you know, there's a couple of different scales. And our customers have come to us asking, you know, should I be using a 5-point Likert scale, a 7-point scale? And really it comes down to the types of questions you're asking. And that's when it's really important to talk with someone that understands survey build out, survey design as to what would work best for a given question. Is it better to have a 7-point scale of extremely dissatisfied to extremely satisfied, or just a 5-point scale of maybe strongly disagree to strongly agree to get you that actionable insight from those customers to really make it worth your while and determine where you might want to invest money, either in a product or service type environment. The other is don't be afraid to go beyond that 5 and 7-point scale to have a don't know or not familiar, especially if you're reaching out to a group where maybe not everybody is going to know or have firsthand knowledge to all of the questions in the survey. Ideally, you'd want to do conditional logic so they only see the questions that they know, but sometimes that might not be applicable in that given situation. So having that option really helps, and being consistent throughout. So always having a don't know, not familiar option with all of the questions, not just 1 or 2, if you're going to be in that situation. So, and really always be sure that the scales are reflected the same way, left to right. Sometimes people will want to try to put the satisfaction at the beginning. It should always be the dissatisfaction to the satisfaction, reading left to right is best practices. And understanding that and working through that, having a neutral option and everything are things that Centric Solutions can help you build out for your types of questions. So, that kind of goes into knowledge, right? I led in here with maybe you're going to have situations where an individual doesn't necessarily have firsthand knowledge to a particular question. Assuming knowledge can be just as bad. So, Christian, you want to cover that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So it also comes down to the respondents that you're going to be inviting to your survey as well. Thinking about if you have one customer, but you have multiple contacts with that customer, those respondents may have varying experiences with your company. A common example that I see is maybe with tech companies. So you often have users that are in the platform only, very familiar with the features functionality, but then you also are surveying your decision maker contacts or main points of contact. And while they do have some familiarity with the system, maybe they're better equipped to answer customer success or service level type questions, those sort of interactions. So you talked about, Jonathan, introducing conditional logic. That's a good place, it's a good application here when you think about varying experiences. But you also, thinking about the sections of your survey and what context would be necessary. Is there any acronyms or jargon that you're using that maybe your users are not familiar with, but the decision makers are? So defining those or adding context around, a particular set of questions can be really important. And Jonathan, how about you take us into leading questions?
Yeah, leading questions is an interesting area, right? It's basically suggesting the answer. You're leading the person to a specific answer choice. An example I use a lot is how satisfied are you with our ability to provide quick and accurate answers to your questions? Well, you're already directing them in that area, right? You're assuming that you're providing them quick and accurate answers. And that's a real problem when individuals within the organization are writing the questions themselves. You kind of already put that bias spin on the questions. It's often unintentional, right? And it's a common mistake in surveys that are designed internally by teams. Having that third party removes that aspect. It removes that bias, and it allows those questions to be much more open to either statement type scenarios. Maybe we could do matrix questions where you have attributes for things that people are going to agree or disagree or be satisfied or dissatisfied with. We can work with that organization to build that out to avoid those problems, because invariably by creating those leading questions and focusing in your customer base on answering a certain way, you may end up getting overly inflated satisfaction scores for some questions and not others, where maybe they weren't leading questions. And what that means is you're going to invest possibly in the wrong direction with the product or services. So avoiding leading questions is going to help you in the long term down the line and not artificially inflate any of your satisfaction scores. So it's a really important one. So if we jump to the next page, that leads us into, arguably just as important an element as leading questions. What are double-barreled or compound questions, Christian?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is probably one of the first lessons I learned in questionnaire design. And really, if you don't have any experience, this is probably one of the first mistakes you're going to make. You're thinking about what you want to measure, and you can have more than one attribute within one question. As an example, you can ask, how satisfied or dissatisfied are you with the responsiveness and proactiveness of your team? Well, proactiveness and responsiveness are essentially completely separate attributes. You can have a very responsive team, but proactiveness, actively reaching out without being prompted, is a completely different metric to be looking at. So think about specifically what you want to measure. And if you get feedback on a double barrel question, well, how are you going to act on it? If your scores are low, you don't know if it is responsiveness or proactiveness. So in cases like that, you're better separating them out and maybe having all kinds of customer service type questions and attributes in a matrix. Well, and Jonathan, that can also touch into thinking about ambiguous questions, or not even don't seem to be measuring anything. Can you give us an example of that?
Yeah, I mean, a common example arises for survey questions containing negative words, right? If your question has a not in it or maybe a double negative that could easily confuse somebody, that's just creating a problem because now you don't know what they're actually giving you feedback on. Now, this isn't to be confused with answer choices, with disagree or agree. This is in the question itself. You really want to avoid that. And this kind of ties back into one we talked about earlier, where is, do they know the nomenclature? Are you using abbreviations or mnemonics that they fully understand? And one of the things you can do to avoid any ambiguity is define words. So, with our survey software that we use, we actually have the ability to create a hover or a pop-up above words within our surveys, where it will define things. So everybody is on the same page, and it objectively allows them to answer that question the same way another individual would. So it removes any subjective aspects there for key things we're asking them to answer or define in those types of questions. And one of the things here when it comes to ambiguous or unintelligible is this happens a lot the longer a survey gets, because you want to try to find out as much information as possible, sometimes getting too deep into the weeds for individuals, which leads, Christian, into things we've seen with unnecessary questions. Times when clients have come to us with a 20 or 30 or 20 or 30 question questionnaire that they want us to field, and we have to work with them on that.
Yeah, really, whenever that happens, you get a lot of people involved. They want something in it for them, right? And it could lead to just a lot of questions that really are not going to do you any good or get you any closer to your goal. So one question that I always ask myself, and then I in turn present it to my clients is, well, how is this actionable? How is this question going to get us closer to our goals? How is it going to, knowing this information, going to benefit your customers, going to benefit your bottom line? One thing that we really like to do here at Satric Solutions is before we really put pen to paper, we will actually get on the phone with the executive stakeholders we have with our new client and really drill in and try to understand what their goals and hopes and desires are for the survey. And once we get a broad range of concepts, we can actually design questions uh, designed to get that feedback and hopefully achieve the goal for those executive stakeholders. And think about designing your questionnaire in the frame of that goal would really be helpful. One thing that I see this a lot is, when clients come to us, they get multiple departments involved. So you have engineering, you have marketing, you have customer success, all of which have their sometimes different agendas or different metrics they want to look at, and they want to get their hands on the survey. And while they're all well-intentioned, it can really you make your survey much longer, and then the questions are not necessarily relevant to those customers. So, think about, just ask yourself again, is this going to be actionable? And, actually along those lines, we talked about scale questions, multiple choice. But Jonathan, obviously open-ended questions are a big part of what we do. And sometimes you can go overboard. You want to talk to us about that?
Yeah, we've had clients come to us who have tried to start these programs, like I mentioned earlier, and they've got these lengthy surveys, and after almost every quantitative question, they have a qualitative or open-ended question. And when you think about it, let's say you've got 10 open-ended questions in a survey, and you've got 100 responses. That's 2,000 sentences that you've got to read and look at. And many of our clients, when they come to us, they're not utilizing that open-ended feedback the way they should. They're not actually reading everything word for word. They're not analyzing that. Text analytics is just not quite there yet in the AI world to really look at sentiment and understand. At Satrix, we take the time to actually read all the verbatim feedback and look at it as actionable. And by doing that, we understand the types of open-ended questions that elicit the best actionable feedback from customers. So we really try to recommend keeping it down, to 3 to 5 open-ended questions in a given survey. Obviously, if it's a net promoter one, you're going to want to have one right after the net promoter score. But where are those other open-ended questions going to come in that's going to give you added feedback to that quantitative type question that's really going to be actionable and really help them work on investment opportunities, either on the product roadmap or on the service team, to improve that CX or customer experience over time. And I think, Christian, everything that we've talked about here gets into the length of the survey. Where is that important? And why don't you go ahead and talk about that one?
Our surveys never take more than 3 to 5 minutes tops to finish. And in those 3 to 5 minutes, we get very rich, actionable feedback. When you go beyond that, you're likely just going to be irritating the respondents taking the survey. But I can't tell you how many survey invitations I get and say, hey, do you have 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes sometimes even to take the survey? I'm like, no, who does? There are a lot of other things I'd rather be doing with that time. So, if your survey can't be completed in 3 to 5 minutes, you may want to consider your design, what questions you're asking, and really any of the prior 9 subjects that we covered apply to your questionnaire. And Jonathan, all that said, we generally stay away from overly burdensome surveys because of abandonment and the risk to the data integrity. There's also another risk of respondents just straightlining this through the survey or otherwise just rushing through it, trying to get it over with.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting. We haven't even talked about this yet, but all of this applies in that garbage in, garbage out. If your questions are not where they should be, if you're not taking in these 10 key considerations when designing it, the information you're getting is going to be practically useless. Just because the technology is out there and so readily available at this point to just create a survey and send it out doesn't mean that everybody should be doing a DIY survey for their customers, especially in the B2B arena, where it comes down to the people that you are going to be surveying are most likely decision makers in the C-suite. You're going to be dealing with VPs, senior VPs for influencers, and then users who are going to be dictating whether or not those organizations, feel that what you're giving them is helping the organization so that they'll continue to use and hopefully expand. So more important than anything else is the questions you ask and how you ask them. And that's where Satrix Solutions really comes into play, is helping you design those questions so that they are actionable for you, so that the feedback you receive is statistically reliable, it's good, and that it will actually benefit customers over time with that experience, be it the product roadmap or the services that you offer. And that's what we at Satrix Solutions really can provide to you. So as part of the video series today, the slide that you see up, this is a great takeaway. Print it out, put it up in your office, keep it in the folder, to help remind you of these considerations when thinking about a survey and thinking about if you're going to work or build out a brand new CX program, to reach out to us. We can help you with that and build a survey that will provide you with the best results from your customers, prospects, or former customers as well. All of those apply for different types of surveys that we can do. So as we move to the next slide, in addition to this, please use your mobile device, scan that QR code. It will give you a much more detailed article that we've written that cover everything that Christian and I have talked about today in more detail. And if you have questions, if you want help, we are offering free office hours to those individuals that reach out to us on LinkedIn or our website. And you can talk to us, show us what you've already got with your survey. Happy to go over it with you, do an analysis of it, and talk to you about maybe some ways to reevaluate or make that survey questionnaire better. So if we want to jump to the last slide, you can reach us at these locations and reach out to Christian and I directly if you'd like. Christian, anything you'd like to add?
No, Jonathan, I think that just about covers everything. I mean, really, this is a great subject. I mean, you and I being here for over 7 years apiece, I mean, we've seen it all, and I'm sure, in another year, we could probably come up with another 10.
That is true. That is true. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed this video in our series, and we'll have another one coming out soon. Thanks. Have a great day.